Welcome, everyone, to the latest edition of the Employer Handbook Zoom Office Happy Hour. My name is Eric Meyer. I am an attorney at Fisher Broyles, and I am also the proprietor, publisher, editor, coffee maker for the Employer Handbook blog. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you being here. We're going to be talking about unions today. Not a particularly popular topic when you juxtapose that against traditional employment topics, but hey, we had a pretty good sign up today, and I'm continuing to admit people. So I hope you all enjoy our conversation. With me today is one of my good friends, one of the blogging OGs, great employment lawyer, a Philly transplant, sitting in Cleveland. Jon Hyman, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Eric. We were saying before we went live, it's been a minute since we saw each other, but it's good to see you.
Yeah, I think the last time we ran into each other was at a bar in Cleveland, which is apropos of a growing portion of your practice, right?
It is, yeah. So I am full-time employment lawyer, part-time craft beer lawyer. So it was weird, man, when COVID, like most employment lawyers, COVID kept us all busy for a long time. And then when the COVID work started to dry up, I was like, so what's the next pivot? Like, where's the next move? And so I've represented craft breweries over the years. They're fun businesses to represent. And so I started a craft beer practice. So I'm representing craft breweries all over the country, which is super cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And craft breweries are having labor issues too, correct?
Craft breweries are having labor issues like seemingly every other company nationwide. Yeah, but hospitality businesses for certain seem to be on the forefront of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I've got my prop. I was there this morning. Got my coffee. Got my prop. For those of you,
you should really do better, and you should support like local coffee roasters instead of corporate conglomerates.
I do, and I could shout out a few of them. I actually tried to, but the Starbucks is right next to the gym I was at this morning,
and it was too good a prop. It was also too good a prop for the webinar. So
yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about Starbucks today. So the stars aligned for Starbucks today. So no disrespect intended to the local roasters. I love them as well. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube as we record this, thank you. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Hit the bell notification icon. We've been posting a lot of these chats to YouTube, so you'll be notified the next time one goes up. We appreciate you. Let's dispense with the disclaimer, both for the live folks and the YouTube folks. Jon's a lawyer. I'm a lawyer, but don't get it twisted. We're not your lawyer. And if we are your lawyer already, for the next hour, we're not. Because nothing we say is intended to create an attorney-client relationship. And while it may sound like we're giving legal advice, it's really intended to be quite generic, and we're not giving legal advice. And who in the right mind would take legal advice from a free Zoom? That's nuts. If you have specific legal questions, please consult your local employment attorney. I mentioned that we have some closed captioning enabled if anyone needs it, and it should be turned on. And folks, I have everyone muted. You're not going to be able to unmute yourself. You're not going to be able to turn on your video. However, if you'd like to communicate with us, ask questions, that's what the chat feature is for. Please do that at the bottom. Utilize the chat feature. Just give us a shout out. Say hi, hello, how you doing, all that kind of stuff. If you just want to support the Philadelphia Eagles and Phillies today, go for it. You can do that in the chat feature. We will kick out any Dallas Cowboys and New York Yankee fans. With all that out of the way, I don't want to bury the lead. So the title of this was
seriously,
someone's already pushing
Renee, you're not making friends.
Cowboys hashtag. All right, we'll see what happens on Sunday. Jon, I don't want to bury the lead. Are labor unions having a moment, or are we really seeing a trend?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think the pendulum for now has definitely swung heavy towards labor unions and labor organizing. And we can talk in a second about kind of why that is and what has kind of led to this perfect moment for labor unions. I think the pendulum will swing back more to the center of kind of where we traditionally see the role of unions in American workplaces, but I don't think it's ever going to swing all the way back. So while I think they are having a moment, I think that moment is signaling a trend that's going to continue, although maybe not to the degree that we've seen over the last like 18 months.
Okay. How much of this, the increase in union popularity, I've seen you posted polls. I don't remember the exact numbers, but basically it was like general approval of unions has gone up. I don't know, some huge, I'm going to say at least 50%, if not
Yeah,
higher.
it's well over 50%. I mean, the takeaway is that if your employees are organizing, you're screwed. I mean, you're so far behind the eight ball because the sentiment of your employees is going to be so like union rah 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 and they're getting fed the propaganda that unions feed them during organizing anyway. And so you're so far behind the eight ball that that it's not you're fighting such a battle. So
How much do you think the increase in union popularity is age derivative? That is to say, millennials and Gen Z are the ones who are really more supportive of unions, or at least more so than people had been in the past in other age groups.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of what we're seeing is generationally driven. Um, I think there's a couple of reasons why. And you can look at like just the workplaces that are being organized that have caught all the attention. So places like Starbucks, like Trader Joe's, like Apple, these workplaces, they skew young, they skew Gen Z, right? You don't see a lot of baristas at Starbucks that look like you and me, right? They're younger people. And I think the issues that they're looking for play, and we can talk about that too, what's driving this play into those generational issues. But I also think that when we look back over the last, 18 to 24 months, and we look at kind of where Gen Z has kind of put their attention. So you look at things like Black Lives Matters and the George Floyd protests and LGBTQ plus protests and what we've seen after the Dobbs decision and like the abortion rights protests. I think generationally, like the generation that's out there protesting, pushing these issues, learned a lot about organizing around social justice issues, and they've taken those lessons and they've turned them now, kind of focus them on the workplace and said, all right, we've learned all this from this social justice organizing. Now we're going to see if we can make a difference in our workplaces too. So I do think a lot of it is generationally driven.
In terms of, we talk about social justice and other causes, other motivating factors that have helped unions gain foothold. I'm going to using the word social media. How much do you think, 1 to 10, how much, 10 being huge motivating factor, 1 being it's a nothing burger? How much do you think social media has helped unions organize American workplaces? And I'm thinking specifically, I mean, maybe at one point it was Facebook and Twitter, but now I'm thinking more Instagram
TikTok.
and TikTok.
Yeah, I'd put it at least a 7.
Mm-hmm.
The unions have used Facebook, particularly. They've been using for years, but that's really not where employees are now. They're on like Instagram and TikTok, and unions have figured out a long time ago how to harness the social platforms to their benefit, and they continue to use them for that purpose, for organizing. And a lot of they've gotten very effective at using the social media platforms to get their messaging out to help drive this organizing. So I I don't know if it's I don't know if the social media is the chicken or the egg here, and I'm not sure it matters, but it is definitely a marketing platform that the unions have learned to use to their benefit and have used it to great benefit with what we're seeing going on out in the workplaces for the last, 12, 18, 24 months.
Is that something that you've seen employers using too, in order to demonstrate that our workplace should remain non-union, or by that point, is it just a gimmick, right? You've already lost if you're resorting to social media.
I think at that point it's a gimmick. And I saw there was a comment that came through that mentioned employers ham-fisted responses that haven't helped with what's going on with the union organizing. A lot of what employers are doing, and we can use, I mean, we can hold kind of Starbucks up as the talisman example because they've had 250 stores that have been successfully organized, and they are the poster child for the current wave of unionization around the country. Like Starbucks management, and Howard Schultz hasn't held their current or their kind of interim, former, now kind of current interim CEO who's stridently anti-union. Like he hasn't helped with some of his comments that are out there about how he doesn't think unions are the answer, but they're firing organizers and they're cutting shifts and they're giving they're giving pay raises to non-union stores or extra benefits to non-union stores. I mean, they're to a degree, they're using the union busting 101 playbook, but it's also playing right into the hands of what the organizers are telling the employees. Like the organizers are saying, this is why you need a union, because your employer doesn't care about you. You need job protections. You need assistant, you need just cause protections. You need a voice. You need an advocate. You need an agreement to give you better pay, better benefits to protect your job. All these things that union organizers tell employees. And then these employers are going out there and doing all the things that the unions are telling the employees they need protection from. So they're like, it's like proof that the employers are like the union's proof of concept. Like the employers can't get out of their own way.
Yeah, and it's pretty tough. I mean, there are some kind of standard talking points that are in the union busting playbook, like, we start from scratch. If you have a union, nothing's guaranteed. You're gonna have to pay union dues and things like that.
You could lose pay. Now, the union says you're going to make money, but we need to bargain, and you might lose money, and you might lose benefits, and all those things. All of which, by the way, is true. But I think employers need to really consider their messaging here, because I mean, and not to repeat myself, but what they're playing into the hands of the union organizers. And to some degree, I feel like once the union comes in, particularly now, I think you've almost lost, because there's not a lot you can say or do around the current wave of organizing that's gonna I think that's going to convince employees that I'm not saying you should just fold up your tent and voluntarily recognize the union, but there's not a lot you can say or do that's not going to play into the union's hands. I think the employer's best defense now really needs to come in like before the union presents the authorization cards and asks for the vote. Like you need to be taking a hard look at your workplace culture. You need to be looking at, do employees have a voice? Are we treating people fairly and equitably? Do people think they're being paid fairly and equitably? Do employees feel respected? All the things that you and I think make a good quality, productive workplace. That's what employers need to be focusing on before the union even comes in. And on top of that, need to also be training like supervisors, managers, like your frontline, the people that are interfacing day to day with your employees, train them what to look for, like what some of the signs of union organizing might be, so they can recognize, because you may not know that a union is talking to your employees until you get the election petition served on you by the NLRB. So supervisors need to really understand what signs they should be looking for to help, that might signal a union is out there talking to your employees. So, are there strange people hanging around your parking lot that you don't recognize talking to employees? Are there odd kind of mixes of employees that are, hanging out together at lunches or on breaks that typically don't socialize? Are there social gatherings after work that are unusual that like wouldn't excuse me, that wouldn't normally be happening. Things that suggest there might be union organizing going on. But, the other piece of this is, HR doesn't have a lot of experience here dealing with union organizing in the private sector, with only 6%, give or take, of workplaces collectively bargain. It's just not issues that a lot of HR professionals have. It's just issues that a lot of HR professionals haven't had to deal with and don't understand kind of what the roadmap is here, and then what the implications are, both practically from a bargaining perspective, maybe down the road, or legally if you do something wrong. And so it's just a world that HR just isn't familiar with.
I wanted to go back to something you were talking about earlier, John, and that is this. What I've noticed from time to time is this disconnect between management and ownership and their view of how satisfied and happy workers are versus the workers themselves, who may not be nearly as happy, maybe quite unhappy in the workplace. One, how often do you encounter that when you're counseling employers, especially when we're getting down to vote time because the union has got their cards and things like that? And two, how do you overcome that before the union gains the foothold?
Well, to part one, I mean, I think once the cards come in and you're now facing an election, I think something's already been broken in your workplace. Like unions don't have the ability to gain traction unless an employer gives the employees a reason to go kind of outside for that assistance, right? And so I think once the union gains that foothold, if a union's going to get 55% or 65% or 75% of employees to sign cards, at least a sufficient portion of them are going to believe that some are just going to sign just because they sign, but enough of them are going to sign because they genuinely believe that there's something broken in their workplace that needs to be fixed. So if the employer believes, hey, this is the greatest place to work in the world and nothing's wrong, and then they get the petition in the mail, there is clearly a disconnect there in terms of the employer's perception of the employee's happiness versus the employee's perception of their own happiness, right? Because if everything really is like hunky-dory, right, then the employees have no reason to go talk to a union or sign cards or ask for an election.
Right, because the union is only going to notify the employer. I shouldn't say only, but in most circumstances, they're only going to ask for an election or voluntary recognition when they've got cards signed by more than half of the bargaining unit, right?
Oh, well, more than half, right? It's
right.
It's a majority vote of people that vote. You're only going to, if you're the union, you're only at, well, you may ask, there may be reasons why you ask for an election with less, but typically we don't see an election petition until you have well north of 50%, because the union doesn't want to file for that election unless they know there's a good chance they're going to win it, because, right.
Yeah, and for folks who may not be familiar with the process, so a union comes in, starts to talk to employees, starts to take the temperature of whether they have enough support to basically turn a non-union workforce, a bargaining unit, into a unionized unit of employees, basically a bunch of employees who do the same type of work. And the way they do that after talking to them is they get the employees to basically sign these union cards, and the union cards are basically pave the way to, one, the employer voluntarily recognizing the union as the collective bargaining representative for this group of employees, or two, an election. So if more than half of employees sign these cards, right, it doesn't mean that you have a unionized workplace. It means you could eventually have a unionized workplace. Again, the employer could voluntarily recognize the union, or there could be an election. If it's an election, then more than half of the vote of the people who vote in the election, it's a secret ballot at that point, more than half the people have to approve of the union. If that happens, then you are a unionized workplace and you get to collective bargaining negotiations, which we won't spend a lot of time on, but I saw a comment from someone. she said, if employees only knew what happens behind the scenes in collective bargaining negotiations, they might rethink unionizing.
Yeah, and that's right. So the election is step one, right? The employees vote the union in. Step two is negotiating that first contract, and that's really where employers really hold the power, because you can, as long as you're bargaining in good faith, and there's like good faith does a lot of work in that sentence, and there's big air quotes there, but as long as you're bargaining in good faith, you can bargain to an impasse and implement your last, as an employer, and implement your last offer as the terms and conditions. So the employer, I think in the organizing process, I think the union has a huge advantage. In the collective bargaining process, the employer has a huge advantage. And that's really what right. Are you going to bargain at that first contract? And are the employees going to be happy, right, when you bargain at that first contract? Are they going to be happy what that first contract looks like? And if they're not, as the union, is there a perception that you've sold them a false bill of goods? And there probably is.
Well, if you've been with the company for a while, I think there's a proportional relationship to your level of happiness out of that first collective bargaining agreement.
To the extent that seniority is usually a component of most collective bargaining agreements. Yeah, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But to the extent that we think that age, for example, is driving a lot of this, right? Younger workers who might end up getting screwed in a collective bargaining agreement might have a very different perception of the pros versus the cons of what that agreement looks like.
So we have a question that relates to just what we're talking about right now. How does the fact that none or virtually none of these organic unions have successfully negotiated a contract impact the viability of the union model long term?
It's a great question. So I think we're talking about these organic unions. I think what we're talking about is a lot of what we're seeing now. We're not seeing the Teamsters or the auto workers or the steel workers as the organizing entities that are driving this. We're seeing employees form these independent worker unions. The Starbucks, the Starbucks workers union, the Amazon workers union, that are driving this. Now there is big labor behind them offering support. They're offering office space and administrative support and legal support to kind of help these unions, because it's in big labor's interest for these independent unions to win their elections and bargain contracts. But the rise of these independent unions is a huge issue, and one of the biggest takeaways from what we're currently seeing. To the extent they're not having success successfully bargaining agreements, it's a wonderful talking point for employers, because you can absolutely, there's do's and don'ts of union organizing, of what you can or can't say as an employer, but what you can always give is what you can always communicate to employees in collective bargaining are facts and examples. And news stories of 250 Amazon stores have voted to unionize, and none of them have successfully bargained a contract yet with the employer. That's a wonderful talking point for an employer to go to their employees with during organizing, to say, you might vote for the union, but that's just the first step. And, you need to really dig into what the union's promising is going to get you, because the unions haven't gotten those employees that yet anywhere. So it is, in terms of the future viability of what we're seeing with organizing. I think that's part of what's going to help drive this pendulum back towards the center. But it's also a great talking point for employers to help kind of beat these organizing efforts down as we're kind of playing whack-a-mole with the unions.
Yeah, that's the other side of this shiny penny, right? So if we have these kind of startup independent unions who are organizing, great, you have the support, but when you get to the bargaining table, you also lack the experience to negotiate with some of these larger employers that have been there, done that,
who
and
are
have
bringing
hired
in
some of the biggest, best law firms in the world to help negotiate on their behalf. They know every trick in the playbook.
You are correct. And so, the vote is step one. It might be the less important step. I mean, the really important step is negotiating that contract. And Chris Smalls, who's the head of the organizing effort at the Staten Island Amazon facility that organized, I've listened to a lot of interviews with him where he said we're absolutely going to get that first contract. I don't know, man. I don't know. Amazon has a real vested interest in not giving those employees a contract because Amazon, if those employees bargain a successful contract in that facility, the risk is that other facilities will see that, and then the union dominoes will start to topple, and all of a sudden you have more and more Amazon distribution facilities that are organized, which is what Amazon obviously and absolutely doesn't want. And so the employees, it might be real bravado out of inexperience, it might be false bravado because they need to present that they're going to get that contract. Either way, they got a long road ahead of them because Amazon is so vested in not giving them a contract or not giving them a contract that's going to let them claim a win.
Yeah. Now, someone in the comments pointed out that many of these independent unions are backed by more recognized unions, and I see that in the cannabis space. I do some work there, and the UFCW has been backing a lot of the unionizing efforts in the cannabis space, and there have been contracts entered into in the cannabis space. So I suppose your mileage does vary, even though it's a still relatively nascent industry. Your mileage may vary. Jon, I wanted to ask you about some other factors that you believe do or do not facilitate unionization. Some of them will be kind of social events, political headwinds, and the others will be just kind of what's going on within the workplace. So a small microcosm. So on a macro level, Me Too. I mean, we don't talk about Me Too much anymore, but do you think Me Too really spearheaded much of the unionizing effort? I don't, but do you?
I don't either. It was 5 years, I think. Yesterday was the 5-year anniversary of the Me Too movement. Is that do I have that right? I think, or close to it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. 2017. That's right.
Yeah. I don't think Me Too has a lot to do with it at all.
How about COVID?
COVID, I think, has a lot to do with it.
Okay.
I think safety issues are always at the forefront of union talking points. When we talk about like the union organizing playbook, the unions always talk about safety with employees, and what you will often see, for example, is unions pushing employees to go file OSHA complaints. Because then it gives the union look, your employer doesn't care about your safety. Look at all these OSHA citations they've rung up. Safety is always a big talking point for unions. COVID gave unions additional ways to talk to employees to say, look at all the ways that your employers don't care about you. They're not enforcing social distancing. They're not, they're allowing people to walk around unmasked. They don't have enough hand washing stations. They're forcing you to come back to work when you can work remotely and you don't want to come back to work. It is kind of it's been the bellwether workplace safety issue for the past 2.5 years, and it's given unions that talking point to put right in employees' ears, because employees have been living with that day in and day out. So I think huge issue.
How about general support from this presidential administration? I don't mean to make this a political hot button topic, but do you think that Joe Biden expressing support for unions and Kamala Harris, do you think that's moved the needle?
It kind of is a political issue, because the NLRB it's an administrative body appointed by the president, and the NLRB's policies do change administration to administration depending on the party that's in the White House and who gets to appoint both the NLRB is a five-member board, and whoever gets to appoint the majority of the members on the board plus hire the general counsel for the NLRB gets to set policy. And the current Joe Biden is the most pro-union president we've ever had, and B, he's the general counsel that he's hired for the NLRB, Jennifer Abruzzo, has put forth an aggressive pro-union agenda that is, I don't think unions need help organizing. They win, depending on the year, between 65 and 75% of representation elections. Unions win anyway. So I don't think they need a lot of help in the organizing area. But she has put forth a very, very aggressive agenda to help more unions win representation elections, both in, she wants to eliminate or make illegal captive audience speeches where employers, pull employees into a conference room or an auditorium, or even just a supervisor getting an employee or a group of employees one-on-one and giving them kind of the anti-union spiel. She wants to make certain communication messages that have been long legal in organizing. She wants to make them illegal. She really wants to, the tools that employers have available to them, she wants to pull a lot of them away, which is going to make it much more difficult for employers to get their messaging out to employees during an organizing campaign. So while we don't want to make it a political issue, it's hard to ignore that it is, because I think politics have a lot to do with what's going on here.
Within an organization, we know that, if there's bad management, there's more likely to have a union presence. If employees perceive that their benefits are below market or they're being underpaid, they're more likely to turn to a union. But how about some factors like mental health, right? So we see more emphasis now on employee mental health, work-life balance. How do those factors play into unionization?
I mean, I think they do. I think it all comes down to, I think at the end of the day, and a lot of what drives this is that employees want to feel kind of respected and listened to. If they feel they don't have a voice, that they don't have a voice within the organization that's going to listen to their concerns and take them seriously, they're going to go outside the organization to find someone who will. And that's in this case, that's the labor unions. And so to the extent that employees feel that they're having mental health issues that their employer isn't addressing or isn't listening to or taking seriously, or there are work-life balance issues, I think it all falls under the general umbrella of kind of respect and communication. And to the extent that employers aren't listening to their employees' needs, and you might not be able to fix everything for your employees, and you probably can't, but employees just want to know that you take them seriously and are listening and are trying. And if you're not, whether you call it mental health or pay or work-life balance or whatever, if employees feel that they don't have a voice, they're going to go find someone who's going to listen.
Yeah. Well, we're about halfway through this hour-long Zoom. Let's reset real quickly. I'm Eric. That's Jon Hyman from the Ohio Employer Law Blog, employment and labor lawyer extraordinaire based out of Cleveland, Ohio, Philadelphia transplant. And speaking of which, I do want to address this question. I saw it early on. Someone asked, what is the best cheesesteak in Philadelphia? I will say this. You could throw a stone and probably hit a pretty decent one, but a quick top three. Number one would be Angelo's. Number two would be John's Roast Pork. And number three, I'll give a shout out to the South Jersey side. It might not be number three overall, but a decent one in South Jersey is Chick's in Cherry Hill.
I've never been there.
Yeah,
Tony Luke's is my number one. I'd have John Roast Pork second. What's going on with Jim's? Are they going to reopen on South Street? What's Jim's?
The fire. Yeah, I don't know. Someone said not Pat's or Jim's. Not Pat's is good for like nostalgia, I suppose. If you want to see where Rocky stood, where Sylvester Stallone stood in Rocky 1, in the first Rocky, you can see the pink square. Again, not a bad.
It's a great tourist experience to go down and have one at Pat's and one at Gino's and kind of hang out on the corner. So it's a great tourist experience. But yeah, but it's pretty much any pizza place in the tri-state area is going to give you a good cheesesteak.
Yeah, that I think that's fair. That's fair. Just a pro tip: if you see a place that calls it a Philly cheesesteak on the menu,
run! Oh my God, run!
Head for the hills. It is not good. All right, we're gonna pivot a little bit into what employers can do to combat unionization. But before I get there, I want to talk about mistakes. What employers are doing both legally, like what legal mistakes do they make? So I guess to flip that on its head, what do they do that's illegal to stop unions from coming in? And then well, why don't we start there, Jon? What are some of the things you see or hear about? Never your clients, but what are some of the things that you hear about employers doing that are illegal?
Let's start. We can start
avoid unionization.
Yeah, I mean, we can start right where I posted yesterday, which was Bloomberg made there's been lots of unfair labor practice charges filed against Starbucks by the union all over the country. There was the Buffalo region had the first Starbucks that successfully organized. There's a ton of unfair labor practice charges that came out of those organizing efforts. Bloomberg made a FOIA request for the transcript from the trial, the administrative law judge trial, the NLRB trial, and got the testimony of one of the employees who he quit. He said he quit Starbucks. He said in his testimony he quit Starbucks. He was a regional manager. He quit because he didn't want to sacrifice his ethics by doing illegal things, that they were asking him to retaliate against pro-union employees. He was being told by management to like go into the personnel files of long-term employees who were pro-union because he'd be able to find something to write them up for and discipline them. So retaliation is like the number one, like with a capital R, the number one no in that's going to get employers in trouble during union organizing efforts. Employees have the right to organize. Retaliation is so often like we see it in like discrimination cases too, right? Like you win the discrimination harassment case, but you lose the retaliation claim because you did something against the person, even though there was no merit to the underlying claim. You did something against them anyway, and you screwed up on the retaliation side. So retaliation is like big no, number one. The other four things that I use there's different acronyms, but I use the one TIPS, threats, interrogation, promises, and surveillance. Those are the four categories of things you as an employer can't do during organizing. So you can't threaten employees. You can't interrogate employees about their union beliefs or whether they're pro-union, anti-union, they're going to vote for the union, did they sign their card. Can't make promises to employees. If you vote no, we'll give you a pay raise. If you vote no, we'll give you better benefits. We'll give you more time off. We'll also in the promises category is things like adjusting grievances. So you can't like promise to like make things better for employees. Like tell us what's bugging you. Why are you unionizing? What issues do you want to see fixed in your workplace that we're not doing for you? Because implied in that is a promise that if they vote no, you're going to fix it for them. And so you can't do that. And then surveillance, you can't spy on employees. You can't watch who's going to union meetings. You can't intercept communications. You can't send supervisors to watch union meetings and kind of report back on what's happening to see who's there and who might be pro-union. So those are the four things as an employer plus retaliation that are the things that will get you in legal trouble during union organizing.
On the flip side, though, you can listen. So if employees want to share with you information about their feelings on unions or unionizing efforts, you're free to listen.
Yes. You just can't ask. That's right.
Mm-hmm. And you're also free to spout facts about unionization success or lack thereof. We talked a little bit earlier about sharing facts about Amazon, for example, right? I mean, a lot of winning union drives, but how many contracts? And let the employee then kind of connect the dots for themselves. They're not stupid.
Right. Or hey, we know you're being organized by the steelworkers. Have you seen this news story from the Detroit Free Press about the president of the steelworkers just being indicted for embezzlement? Right. Those are all if it's a fact, it's fair to share. Did you see that this plant that unionized, these employees ended up getting a 10-cent decrease in their hourly wage in their first contract? That's a fact, right? As long as it's real, right? It's a fact. You can report it. You can give that to the employees.
Yeah, I used to publish for employees. I don't know how effective it was, and probably not very effective. The book, I'd give them a pamphlet, or have the employer give them a pamphlet of all the things that the union's allowed to promise them, and it's blank. But I wonder, John, behind the scenes, I know employers aren't supposed to promise anything, and unions aren't supposed to promise anything either. But do you think, how much do you think unions are promising?
Oh, how much? I was gonna say, how much do I think they're sticking to that? It's a goose egg. Yeah, they're telling employees a lot. We're gonna get you higher wages. We're gonna get you better benefits. We're gonna get you, we're gonna get you more time off. We're gonna do all of these things for you. Just sign here on the card and then vote yes. Absolutely.
What are some of the well, actually, there's a question. I want to get to this before it jumps off the screen. So, John, what's your view on having conversations with employees about unions prior to organizing? So you have no sense whatsoever that unions are interested in organizing your workplace. Everything seems good, but should you be so proactive as to talk to your employees about why the workplace should remain non-union?
I don't do that as a matter of course. I don't know a lot of employers that like to put that earworm into employees' ears. You don't even want to suggest the U word to, I don't think. I've seen, like, I do a lot of handbook writing and a lot of handbook reviewing, and I see a lot of handbooks that have the statement on unionization in the handbook. It is we are anti-union. This is why we're anti-union. You have the right to form a union if you want, but these are all the reasons why we believe in being a non-union workplace is the right reason. The NLRB does not like that. They don't. They take a very they look very sideways at an employer, even though it's a legal policy to have in a handbook. It doesn't play well in front of the board if you end up in a hearing in front of an administrative law judge. The board just does not like seeing those kind of policies in handbooks. I just saw the comment come in, we're not anti-union, we're pro-employee. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I wouldn't couch it in an anti-union message. I would couch it in a pro-employee message. These are all the reasons why we support you as an employee. We're a good place to work. We are proactively and positively pro-employee, and you couch it in that message and not a where anti-union unions are bad, because you're gonna necessarily, I mean, the stats are off the charts in terms of the number, the percentage of employees that are pro-union or think that unions are good things, and you're gonna ruffle feathers if you come out with a hard anti-union message when you might ruffle feathers, and it might not even be the right message during an organizing campaign, but before employees are even organizing, why push employees into in that direction if there's no talk of a union out there in the workforce to begin with? So I would phrase it as being pro-employee, not necessarily anti-union.
Piggybacking off of one of your points about employee handbooks, we see as the administrations change, when there's a Democrat president and a Democrat majority at the board, that one of the big targets is employee handbooks. Last time around, it was social media policies. This time around, it may be something else. So to the extent that you're putting in anything that could be construed as chilling employees from exercising their right to organize or not organize, that's going to be a hard no with the National Labor Relations Board. Question from Christy. She asks, do you recommend having discussions with supervisors and managers about employee relations and recognizing union activity? So we're not talking to the employees, but now we're talking to the managers and supervisors.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's coming back to a point I made earlier. I mean, we live in a world where most HR professionals, managers, supervisors haven't lived through a union organizing campaign. The number of HR professionals that have experience with labor relations is really small. your frontline supervisors and your managers are the ones who are going to be interfacing with your employees on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones who are going to be, they'll be the ones who are going to recognize when something is off. They're going to be the ones that are going to recognize when, um, you know, Janie and Jimmy, who don't even seem to like each other very much, all of a sudden are going out and having a beer after work, or having a smoke together out back during a break. That might seem to an untrained eye, that might just be, oh, two employees have decided they're going to become friends. To a trained labor relations professional, that might be a signal that there might be union activity brewing, because you have two people that historically have not been friendly, hung out, gotten along, whatever, are all of a sudden like acting like best friends. And so what's the bond that's pulling them together? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a union. But if you don't train your supervisors and managers on what to look for, they're not going to know what to look for, and they're not going to know to report back to you when they see strange things that might be a signal to union organizing. So I think it's especially now, given where we see the pendulum on the union organizing side, I think businesses are are being negligent if they're not investing at least some resources on being proactive around the issue of union organizing, particularly in getting their managers and supervisors trained in the proactively trying to kind of suss out when activity is out there.
So what's the next step, right? Let's assume that we've trained our managers and supervisors. They have sussed out what they believe to be a little bit of smoke in the workplace. Maybe unions are thinking about making some inroads. What's the next step?
Got to start talking to your employees. You got to start, well, I think you need to start take an inward look. You got to take a very honest, right, inward look to what's broken here that's causing employees maybe to talk to labor unions. And you got to do the best you can to be as proactive as possible in addressing issues that exist in the workplace, to take away as many talking points so you can start to peel away those talking points that unions might be able to use against you when they're out there talking to your employees. And you might not be able to fix everything, but this is when you need to take that really honest look at yourself, and then start fixing what you can, and then delivering that really strong kind of pro-employee message to your employees. But it's got to be an honest message. If you're a terrible employer, and your employees are going to look at you, what you're saying, and they're going to say, this is just complete bullshit, there's not much you're going to be able to do. I mean, you got to really, it's one thing to say you're a good employer. It's another thing to actually live it and be a good employer. And it's got to be the latter. Because employees are gonna sniff out the bullshit, and you're just gonna feed right into what the union's telling them.
What are some other ways that you're seeing employers be proactive? We've got the training, surveys. What are some other ways that you think that employers can be proactive about remaining non-union without specifically talking to your employees about, like, we don't want unions here?
Yeah, I mean, surveys, there are employee committees, but there's rules rules around that as well. So like it can't be employer dominated. There's rules around how to organize employee committees. Like they can bring you concerns, but they can't, but there's ways to do it, but you should talk to your labor council about the right way to do it, so you don't inadvertently violate the National Labor Relations Act by trying to do a good thing by putting a committee of employees together. I mean, there's, maybe you can maybe you look at your, pay comparative to the market, and pay doesn't always drive union organizing, but in a lot of cases it does. And maybe you look at your pay and benefits and say, are we competitive with the marketplace? And if we're not, is that something we can address? I mean, there's lots of things you can do to address the concerns that employees might have. The one thing you shouldn't do if you think a union is out there is assume that everything is hunky-dory and sit on your hands and do nothing.
I'm going to give a shameless plug for a Zoom that we're going to be doing next week, and I'll put out, it seems like a good time for it, given what Jon's talking about here. It's going to be same bat time, same bat channel next Friday at noon. It's going to feature two of my partners, one, Amy Epstein Gluck, who many of you have seen before. She is the Fisher Broyles Employment Law Counsel. And I'm also going to bring in a non-employment lawyer, one of my colleagues, Justin Nahama. And we're going to talk about employee well-being and emotional happiness, mental health. And some of what, sneak preview, what we're going to talk about next week is some of what we've done internally at our firm. We have a once a month open meeting on Zoom where anyone can join, and it's just a wrap session where we talk about, could be mental health issues, could be anything that's on your mind, totally voluntary, but it gives employees a space to speak openly and honestly, not necessarily about what's bugging them about work, but about, again, anything that is bothering them, and just basically the rest of us kind of form a support group to help them out. So we're going to talk a little bit about the legality of employee mental health issues, but also some proactive solutions to addressing employee mental health and overall emotional wellness in the workplace. So I hope you can join us. I'll have a link in the blog post on Monday to sign up for that Zoom. I'm really excited for it. John, we have a couple of other questions that people have asked. We got about 10 minutes left in this. So if you have questions, fire them up there. There was a question about, where was it? About strikes and walkouts. And let me see if I can find that one real quickly. Let me see. Oh, well, until I can find that one, here's one that just popped up. What can you prognosticate in terms of the potential for any of the PRO Act to actually get through a new Congress, and what provisions do you think are most likely, if any, to get through? So the PRO Act is basically a Bill of Rights that unions have aggressively asked for through some of the more progressive senators and Congress people. John, I don't remember all 10 or however many are on the PRO Act list, but
there's like card check and some other collective bargaining protections and some other, yeah, it's essentially right, essentially like a Bill of Rights for labor unions. I mean, I think it has like zero chance of passing.
That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're not, I'm, again, not to make this overly political, but let's assume for the sake of argument that all of the like talking heads on the news channels are right, and like the Republicans win the House, the Democrats win the Senate by a small margin. Like, even if the Democrats keep the House, without 60 Democrats in the Senate, like, it'll never pass a filibuster. So the odds of the PRO Act becoming law are, I mean, slimmer than slim.
Yep, I agree. Here's the question. Beyond organizing, it seems like there are more strikes, walkouts, and threats of the same lately with existing unionized workplaces. Are you seeing the same heightened levels? And if so, do you think that will continue?
I mean, yes. I think, again, to the extent employees have kind of learned through, I mean, they've learned through kind of just the general protests in society around social justice issues. I think employees have learned to walk, to kind of speak with their feet to some degree. And so I think we're seeing that. I think we'll probably see it continue to some degree. Of course, the risk for employees when they strike, assuming it's illegal, it's a legal strike, it's either over an unfair labor practice or over, a collective bargaining agreement, and not just a wildcat strike, just employees just want to walk off the job. I think, the ultimate power that the employer holds is to permanently replace those workers with new employees. And so there is a risk to employees who strike, assuming that employers in the marketplace now, where jobs are hard to fill to begin with, can actually find like workers to actually fill those positions. But it's certainly, I think, a risk that's out there and will probably continue.
Let's see. Someone has asked, what are the issues in order of prevalence that you're seeing driving organizing campaigns over the last 2 years? So we've already talked about social media. Well, I guess social media is not really an issue. It's more of a vehicle. COVID, we've talked about. Inflation, economic force generally. How much do you think that plays a role?
I mean, I think it's lack of communication and respect is always the driving force. I think safety remains a huge issue. I think um, poor management, which to some degree is subsumed by this idea of, like management's not listening to us, not taking us seriously. I think discrimination, harassment, I think does play a role here, but not a big role. And then salary, like pay issues, wages. I've never believed that wages are what drive union organizing as the primary focus or the primary driver, but it is definitely an issue that is of concern to workers and is one that it's certainly on their minds. I just don't think it's the driving issue.
Same as it ever was, as the talking
There you
heads
go.
once said.
There you go.
Yeah. Let's see, what other questions do we have? We're almost out of time, but I want to slip in a few other questions if you have them. We got about 4 minutes left. There was a question Donald asked, is there a danger that sharing Amazon's negotiating experience will imply that the employer will not negotiate in good faith if the union is voted in?
I mean, maybe that's certainly what the union's going to argue, I would think, but you have the right to share facts. You're not saying we're not going to bargain in good faith. I mean, and your good faith bargaining will be judged on the merits and the bona fides of your bargaining if the union gets voted and you sit down at the table. So it's one thing to say we're never going to give you a contract. You can't say that. That's a threat. But you can present facts, and yes, some fact you're selectively choosing what facts to give your employees. And sure, there's a motive in saying, Amazon has not yet bargained to its first contract with its union. Yes, there is certainly a reason why you are choosing that fact to provide your employees, but I don't see just the mere provision of like that news clipping to your employees as I don't see a lot of risk in that being perceived as a veiled threat that if the union's voted in, you're going to bargain in bad, you're going to bargain in bad faith and not give them a contract.
Or 12:58. I had another question, but I don't want to push getting over 1 o'clock. I'll give you one question, John. Give me a World Series prediction. What do we have?
I mean, in my dreamland, it would be Guardians Phillies. That's my dream, and the dream lives, at least for now. But probably Dodgers Yankees. Yuck. I mean, yeah. Like if you want to vomit in your mouth like a little bit or a lot, that's probably what it's going to be, even though that hurts like a lot to say.
And I'll give you an Eagles prediction for Sunday. I mean, they'll win. Take the points. Lay the points. The Eagles are going to pound the Cowboys on Sunday.
Jalen Hurts, league MVP.
Yep, no problem. John, thank you so much. Anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
I'll plug something non-legal, man. The Nora and Dad Show. I do a podcast with my daughter. We talk about non-legal things, although I'm volunteering as a legal advisor for her mock trial team. And so we'll talk mock trial on the podcast at some point, but not like real trial. Nora and Dad Show and your podcast apps everywhere. Little vanity project I have with my kid. We talk about, stuff that's not legal.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I put it up in the chat before everyone takes off. You just have to scroll up just a teeny bit, but you connect with John on LinkedIn if you're not already connected with him. Check out his blog. I put the address up there. And if you and I aren't connected yet, what are we waiting for? Send me a LinkedIn connection request. And I'm one of those, what do they call them? Lions. I forget what it stands for, but I'm like an open networker. I click accept as long as your message doesn't say, you and I seem to have a lot of LinkedIn connections in common. Why don't we connect? That's an automatic ignore. So don't do that. All right. Again, I'm going to be back on Zoom next Friday, talking about mental health with a couple of my partners. I'm going to put a registration link to that on Monday. This is going up on YouTube. I'll put chapters in so you don't have to sit through the whole thing. You can fast forward to the parts you like. That'll go up over the weekend. I'll have a link on Monday in the blog, or you can just subscribe to the channel and you'll get it automatically. Other than that, thank you all for attending. We appreciate you and have a great weekend.
Take care, man.
Bye-bye.